Requiem for Mandalore. RK equals. Part 3. RK equals. Hangar. Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. It's good to see you again, Captain Trek. I returned the salute of my chief Black Ops operative. You come bearing gifts, I see. I waved at the transport landed behind the clone. We were into one of the private palace hangars, a large one that was mostly empty if you didn't count a pair of aircars parked at the far end. It was a good place to unload some sample of the gear I could provide the Mandalorian corporations along with a present for my wife-to-be. On that note, I was going married tomorrow, no matter what Scarter and his buddies decided to do. For the last 2 days they were busy debating over supporting my bid for Mandalore or not. At least very few of them had any qualms on taking part in planning the downfall of the Death Watch and taking part of the fun when the time comes. General, we brought the hardware we requested and I have a briefing ready that covers the more sensitive matters you had us handle. Trek nodded. Good work. Have your men unload the cargo and follow me. A few minutes later, we were on board the transport, sitting in its small cafeteria, which was swept clean for any surveillance devices. Nevertheless, I used the Force to make sure we won't be overheard. We sat around the smaller of the 2 tables over a cup of CF and my man started speaking. First, failsafe, Trek stated. That was the project to establish a few hidden colonies where Force sensitives could be kept safe along with their families. Trained to and when everything was set up, carefully indoctrinated to see things my way. The Yavin Foresight is being developed ahead of schedule. We have the prefab colony up and running and our guests have set up comfortably. Initial defenses are operational and we're proceeding with properly concealing the site while excavating the underground complex. Additional defenses would be built in when their bunkers are complete. Splendid. No problems with the guests? They're glad we managed to get them out mostly in one piece and that we're keeping them under the radar of both Jedi and Cisbrand Sith. It won't WAST, but that's good enough for now. Bastion? We've reactivated the base. The codes you provided worked like a charm. Given its location and the extensive asteroid fields in orbit, it would make for a great industrial site, so we've tapped the system for Project Forge as well. Trek gave me a searching look. I don't believe that a proper survey of the system was ever made. You found something interesting, I take it? A lot of useful stuff in the asteroids. Given the radiation thrown by the local star, the unremarkable planets in system and the high metal content in the asteroids, we can easily hide extensive shipyards in there and none would be the wiser unless they come in for a close look. There are enough resources to actually support a decent shipbuilding effort without imports. Once we bring all the machinery and specialists necessary, which won't be happening for the time being, I sighed. Well, Forge was a piece of long-term planning anyway. Status of the silencer? I changed the topic. We'll have the prototype ready on time. As you know, it was built around a freighter we gutted and modified extensively. It's projected to have an acceptable fire rate and range, though it would be very vulnerable if it comes under fire. The first proper cruiser-mounted version is still a few weeks away and the ship it's being fitted on is an obsolete craft even if it's in a good repair. Can't be helped. I won't risk losing control over that piece of hardware by giving it to the Republic at large. Letting it fall in Cis hands, which would be almost inevitable with too many of their and Palpy's agents still running around despite the best effort of the Republic intelligence services, would be even worse. At least I would have an ace up my sleeve shortly. What forces can you bear in this conflict? I waved around us. Mandalore? We've pulled back and scaled down our operations as much as I dare. So about a battalion of infantry, 2 armored battalions and 2 experimental artillery companies made by various weapon systems we've been testing. I winced. Oh, unless everything went to hell I wasn't going to waste my special ops boys in a slugging match on the ground, but it was nice to have them on my disposal, even if they were going to be just a drop in the bucket if the worst happened. Space assets? A bit better. 3 refurbished Captor-class cruisers, they're our main strike arm. We've converted them into heavy missile platforms. Thanks to our friends we have 150 of the new missiles for field testing per ship, the rest are standard concussion warheads. Trek grinned. What new missiles? I apparently missed an R&D memo. Or, more likely, it was with Piet back above Geonosis. My aide was back on Yularen's flagship, dealing with loads of my less sensitive paperwork, while I was busy playing diplomat. It was character building for the poor bastard. The X-ray laser warheads. It's an old technology that hasn't been used in, well, millennia. The deflectors stopped such systems from being useful except in such numbers that they weren't economical, or so the engineers tell me. Yet the boffins made them work? In a manner of speaking. They are big damn missiles, so we'll be able to carry a limited number on anything that isn't a glorified missile platform anyway. Have various problems that still need ironing out and are quite expensive to make useful against modern ships. Trek trailed off his recitation. But some testing apparently promised good results, so we were tabbed for field testing a limited production run. The new missiles have the potential to significantly extend engagement range or give us much more potent alpha strike capability if used to augment a fleet's firepower. While they last anyway. The big bonus is that the laserhead missiles would be much less vulnerable to Guardian interception and the like, which can be useful if the weapon works as advertised. Once we're done, you're to go speak in person with Palian and brief him on what you have available. He'll be in charge in space unless heavy reinforcements can arrive. Understood. Huh? I had only mentioned the idea of laser warheads for missiles in passing while talking with the R&D people, only to be assured that while they were useful when deflector technology was still immature, the thing were more than obsolete nowadays. It seems that someone played with the concept anyway and might have found a useful way to make it work. Score 1 for the boffins. This sure was a pleasant surprise. We have 5 old Thran-to-war cruisers ready to deploy, with 7 more being refurbished by various private contractors. The name doesn't ring a bell. I raised an eyebrow at Trek. Alderani built escorts. 350 meters long, 5 heavy turbo laser cannons, 10 laser cannons, decent shielding and speed for ships of that size. Our refits of Guardian installed along with disposable missile pods, which makes the ship quite sluggish, but I believe the increased firepower is worth it. Huh? We'll see how they'll handle. Have you used them in combat? Only shakedown cruises and weapon testing. The captain shrugged. We have 8 frigates of various origin as escorts and that's it, sir. That's great work, given what you started with. Does that explain where most of my funds went? Along with some investment in various shipbuilding and industrial corporations. Trek nodded. Just as you ordered, sir. Well done. How does the search go? I asked. We've cleared about 50% of the facilities you can remember. A lot have been either destroyed or looted. Some have their support and stasis systems fail, making almost everything useless, though we continue to find mostly intact sites. We've already recovered enough small arms and light vehicles to outfit an army. Most of the heavy equipment requires extensive maintenance and in some cases either upgrades or partial rebuilds to be useful. A lot of the high-end armors we've recovered are better than almost everything but custom-made suits we can find on the market today. We've been throwing them new paint job and plan to use them with your permission. Small arms and shields should be okay. Keep the armors in reserve until you find a way to make them less distinctively looking like Imperial kit. That goes for the heavy equipment too. Understood. On that note, we would need a few orders of magnitude increase in support personnel if we're to make most of the recovered gear useful anytime soon. I'll see what I can do. We'll be looking for help from Ree and their colleagues too. I take it you haven't recovered anything of real note besides the chips and what we'll be providing the Mandalorians with? Unfortunately no, General. We hit 3 sites that should have contained the good stuff as you put it. However, one was destroyed. One looted and the last had its support systems fail and was partially breached by an earthquake when we reached it. The sensitive data and gear had been destroyed as the primary vault purged itself. A pity. When will you able to send teams in the heart of former Imperial space? About a month. We've been hitting the sites easiest and fastest to reach as ordered. That would have to do. Carry on. I have another meeting with Scarter to attend. I finished my CF and stood up. =RK=. Part 4. General Vale's quarters. Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. Obi-Wan, what am I to do with you? I shook my head at the morose Jedi sitting on my couch. Kenobi sent a glare my way. It's your fault, I know it. He grumbled. Well, I might have mentioned something about that to Bo. I trailed off and smirked, before sitting in an armchair facing my guest. Satine thought that it was a splendid idea. The Jedi bemoaned. It is. I nodded sagely. If I was going to take one for the team, no matter how enjoyable or useful for me it was going to be, I was determined to rope in Obi-Wan too. Misery and marriage is loved company. You said yes, right? When Kenobi didn't give me a nod or other sign of confirmation, I became mildly concerned. He was one of the more reasonable Jedi and I've been corrupting his lifelong indoctrination for months so. Griff, he didn't, did he? Kenobi. I trailed off. I told her I needed time to think. Obi-Wan muttered. Oh, boy. Griffith, I was a Sith and a general, not a criffing relationship counselor. How the hell did I find myself in this position? Obi-Wan, I'm well aware that most Jedi don't know how to deal with the opposite gender when feeling and all that stuff are concerned, but I had the vague impression that you had more than a few brain cells to rub together. What the criff is there to think about? You're in love with the infernal woman and I gave you a way to marry her that the council can't really go after you about. It's not like you would be marrying primary for political gain. At least I was unexpectedly lucky on that front for a second time. While I didn't love Bo, there was undeniable attraction between us and she was great in bed. If I was lucky I might fall in love with her. Given that as a Sith it took an extreme amount of luck to be able to marry Ashara and not have Jedi and Sith coming for our heads until the Jedi Council went mental and sent the assassins years later, that was more than I believed possible ever since ending in the academy on Korriban. The only downside of this arrangement was sacrificing the budding relationship I had with Shark T, though that wasn't a big price to pay considering that I still wasn't sure if I liked her because of who she is or because of how much she was like my late wife. I shook my head and looked at the Jedi hogging my couch. Isn't it? Obi-Wan snapped at me. If it wasn't for your bid to become Mandalore, there's no way in the 9 Corellian hells that I could ever think marrying Satine. Really? The only one stopping you is yourself, Obi-Wan. I gave him a disapproving look. The council would frown at you if you marry her. So what? Are you going to let that stop you? Of course, after you criffed and didn't say yes, this might be a moot point. It's not that simple. What makes it complicated? Will you stop being a Jedi? Will you stop protecting the Republic if you marry? I groaned in exasperation. Jedi. Kenobi closed his eyes and sighed. Will I? I've been asking myself that for days. The Jedi slumped back on the couch. Marrying Satine means becoming a Mandalorian. Can I be a Jedi after that? I snorted. There have been both Mandalorian Jedi and Sith. Thousands of years ago perhaps. There has been too much bad blood since then. Yet we're here to make an alliance with Mandalore. You're here to take over the place. Obi-Wan snipped back. What I said. It's the one way to be reasonably sure that too many Mandalorians won't choose to back the other side. It's Sith shenanigans, that's what it is. Naturally. Depending how you look at it, this whole war is Sith shenanigans. Or just the newest installment of the time-tested tradition of Jedi and Sith killing each other and burning half the galaxy in the process. I nodded sagely. Not helping. Did you expect me to be helpful instead of sarcastic? You criffed up by the numbers. Now man up or at least Jedi up, go find Satine and start groveling. Convincingly. Obi-Wan gave me a long-suffered look. You came to a Sith for relationship advice of all things. I snorted. So my advice is thus, go find Satine, grovel, apologize convincingly, swear to marry her tonight then criff her senseless. I should have known this was a bad idea. Obi-Wan groaned. Yep, you should have. Don't you have Death Watch to deal with? Little old me? I'm a proper Mandalore candidate, no killing the opposition before the clan leaders have their say. I leave that for our special ops boys and the local security services. So tonight? They will be hitting all illegal Death Watch operations while we're getting married. I nodded. You would know that if you attended the last few meetings. I got tired of watching you and Scar to haggle. Besides Satine needed some advice. Needed you in bed you mean? It wasn't like that. Kenobi, get off your high horse and go grovel. I have to do some preparations for tonight. More scheming? You know me so well. You're a menace. Thanks for the compliment. Damn Sith. Still singing the party line? Requiem for Mandalore. =RK equals. Part 5. General Vale's quarters. Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. I examined my reflection in the large mirror in the bedroom. My armor was polished and would be shining if it wasn't for the black paint job that almost, but not quite swallowed any light that fell on it. My eyes reached the stylized imperial symbol, now my clan sigil, painted above my heart, and I smirked. The empire might have been gone for almost 4 millennia, but it was far from forgotten. It might yet rise from the ashes of the past if the Republic leadership screwed bad enough to force my hand. It was an emblem I fought under for more than 7 decades before ending in the future. One could say it was as much a part of me as my lightsaber. Once I was sure that my armor was spotless, I went to the bed, where the rest of my gear was ready to be put on. A small smile tugged my lips. Sith and Mandalorian cultures were among the few still existing that you were expected to wed while clad in your best armor and carrying enough weapons to fight and win a small war. Well, that was certainly true for the Sith warriors, and I was one at heart. I picked my gun belt and strapped it around my waist. This was going to be an interesting evening. When Obi-Wan finally vacated my couch, he went to make up with Satine, and a few hours later an amused Bo confirmed that we would be having a double wedding tonight. I hoped that my people who were running the GAR unit protecting the Jedi Temple could give me a recording of the council when they learn about the wedding. I hooked up one lightsaber on my belt and placed the second in a more secure location, a custom-made compartment in my armor. I could imagine what was happening all around Mandalore right now. Republic commando teams and units of the local security services were getting into position, ready to strike every known illegal Death Watch operation. Just to show that the government wasn't singling them out, various other criminal enterprises were about to be hit at the same time. It was going to be a thin excuse, but plausible enough. When all was said and done, the ordinary Mandalorian citizen had no love for drug dealers and some of the other, nastier things the Death Watch had their fingers in. I put a vibro knife in my right boot, then grabbed a grenade bandolier, perhaps an overkill, but given my luck with wedding and women. I shook my head and grabbed a custom-made black cape. It looked light, as if made of silk, yet the material was a synthetic armor weave that might hold up to a blaster shot or two. I put it on, locked it on above my shoulders, and grabbed my helmet. A moment later I was in front of the mirror, giving myself one final examination. I looked like a proper Sith, an imposing, intimidating figure. It was time to face the music. =RK=. I met Obi-Wan in the corridor leading out of the guest quarters. He was in his GAR-issued armor, though it was polished well enough that it was practically shined under the lamp's soft light. He wore light brown, almost red robes over his armor, which did nothing to hide the symbols painted on his shoulders. One was the Republic-stylized Republic emblem on his left shoulder. On the right I could see half the winged sword that was the familiar sign of the Jedi Order of old, an actual sword, not the stylized lightsaber of today's Jedi. Going with the classics I see? I nodded at his shoulder. Satine was insistent that I must choose a clan symbol. It actually suits you. Once you finally get your head straight and forget the propaganda, you would probably be the first proper Jedi this galaxy has seen in the last few millennia. I gave him a thumbs up. Thanks. I think. Obi-Wan gave me one of his patented strange looks. Let's not let the ladies waiting or we will get shot. Something tells me you aren't joking. We're marrying Mandalorian women. Not showing in time for the wedding without a proper battle to distract us is simply not done. We're becoming Mandalorians. Obi-Wan sighed. Given his expression, Kenobi obviously wondered how the hell did he end in this position. =RK=. Death Watch Sub HQ. Industrial District. Sundari. Mandalore. Nina, the leader of Omega Squad, used the built-in zoom function of his new armor to examine their target. It was a warehouse, one among many in this district. Instead of using that to hide, the Death Watch idiots were announcing their presence for everyone to see. Banners next to the main entrance complete with a squad of bored-looking Mandalorians lounging around. If this was a trap, the supposed guards outside weren't let on the secret or had nerves of steel. A single click over the encrypted comm informed Nina that the demo expert was in position, ready to blow up the main entrance, and the poor bastards clustered around it. Another click, which carried a different code segment, confirmed that Phi was in position, providing overwatch and sniper support. Nina glanced left and saw the last 2 members of his team, Atin and the still-in-training core, slid in position, allowing them to put the entrance under crossfire. That only left the local law enforcement to arrive and ensure that no one would be running away. Nina glanced at the mission clock that was counting down in the upper right of his HUD. 15 more minutes and the attack could start. All over Sundari and most large Mandalorian cities, Commando units and local law enforcement were getting in position for tonight's raids. It was the one thing Generals Scarter and Vale had agreed on. While he waited, Nina allowed himself to think about the bigger picture on Mandalore, though that didn't stop him from carefully scanning the surrounding area. To put it bluntly, the situation was weird. The clone could understand why General Vale wanted to become Mandalore. This planet was ready to blow up, it just needed a spark, and there was no lack of people ready to provide it. Arguably, the arrival of a Separatists' task force to escort their ambassador was that spark. Yet, Pop Scarter was right too. None of them could be sure that Vale had the right reasons for becoming Mandalore, the right ideas for the future of the Mandalorians. Unfortunately, while if you asked him, Nina would be ecstatic if Scarter could become the next Mandalore, the clan leaders were unlikely to support the old man. From what he got by quietly listening to the discussion between the generals, there were very few viable candidates, with only Previsioner and Vale being the ones having a realistic chance. That put an interesting twist to the situation. While Nina hadn't fought under the Sith generals, he had heard good things from buddies under his commands. Yet, that by itself didn't make the man a good candidate for Mandalore, something that concerned Nina quite a lot, because he did see Cal Scartu as his father and Mandalore as home, even if his allegiance was first and foremost to the Republic. On the other hand, what did make a good Mandalore? At the very least, from what he knew, General Vale would make a decent Mandalorian, and he would be one very soon. That wasn't something he could say for Vizsla and his Death Watch, the criffing outlaw scum. Nina continued to observe the warehouse and hoped that the generals knew what they were doing. =RK=, Part 6. Royal Palace, Sundari, Mandalore. It was a small room, empty with the exception of 3 banners suspended between wooden poles. On the right it was the Imperial, my, symbol, painted in black on a sheet of navy blue. In the center was suspended the Mandalorian skull-like emblem on yellow fabric. Finally, the Kryze clan emblem, a stylized blue V on white. I was about to marry for a second time, and it was anything but a grand affair as one might expect from warrior people. All that it took was an exchange of vows, that didn't even had to happen in person. A comm call or a text message was enough, technically. For a moment I allowed myself to think about Bo's reaction if I tried to pull such a stunt on her. She would be either amused or pissed enough to shoot me. Probably both. My lips twitched at that thought. Just like Veta. I shook my head, chasing away the wave of nostalgia and sadness brought by that thought. That was in the past, and I was about to make a commitment to the future. The door opened with a quietus, revealing Bo-Katan in all her glory. She wore the same armor in which she faced me during our spar, painted in deep, almost sparkling blue. It was adorned with her clan symbol on the chest above her heart, the shoulders, and on the helmet she carried in the crook of her right arm. A long, flowing cape in the same color flowed behind her, barely touching the floor. Her short red hair was held in place by a silver diadem, crowned by a pair of flowers that looked familiar but I couldn't place. She had a pair of blaster pistols on her waist and a lot of built-in weaponry even without a rocket pack. Bo stopped and gave me a long look, then smirked. "You would do. You're definitely the better looking of us," I shot back. Naturally. Bo walked in and the door slid closed behind her. Despite her bravado, I could feel a silver of uncertainty coming from her. At least she was excited by the prospect of marrying me and not entirely from what the marriage could do for her. "You know, I had lost hope of actually going through with this, with anyone," Bo muttered and walked next to me. Given that those born in the Mandalorian culture usually married young, shortly after becoming 16, I could see where she was coming from. I think. No one lived up to your standards. Fishing for compliments? You barely make the cut too. Her smirk was back in its full glory. The things you do to my pride, I chuckled. Someone has to keep your ego from getting too big. I volunteered myself. Her smirk was replaced by a wan smile. Thank you. I raised an eyebrow in response. Kenobi, I understand you made the idiot pull off his head from his ass. I was about to start hunting him when he crawled back and started apologizing to Satine. I'm glad to be of service. Besides, you share some of the credit. I told him you'll kneecap him if he doesn't shape up. I would have done worse, Bo muttered. She gave me a mischievous smile. Shall we? Before the guests start thinking that we started our wedding night a bit early, I nodded and offered her my hand. She took it, entangling her fingers with mine. I looked in her eyes and allowed myself a genuine smile. Perhaps this might actually work. We are one when together. I spoke in Mandalorian. We are one when parted. Bo repeated the first part of the vow and continued with the next. We share all, we raise warriors. We finished together. There wasn't any earth-shaking revelation, no shift in the force. Just 3 simple sentences. No fuss. I leaned forward and caught her lips in a searing kiss. For a moment I was lost in Bo's eyes as our tongues dueled. It wasn't until we had to separate for a bit of air until it dawned on me. I was married. I had a partner to share the burdens and to face the future with. Somehow that simple fact filled a void I didn't know was even there. I smiled and leaned back into Bo, seeking her lips again. =RK=, Death Watch Sub HQ. Industrial District. Sundari. Mandalore. Nina watched the mission clock, which hit 0 and started ticking up. He sent 3 clicks over the comm just as 3 armored shuttles slammed into the flanks and back of the warehouse and started disgorging armored officers. The guards had just enough time to jump from the bench and few stools they were lounging on, when a missile screamed between them and slammed in the door they were supposed to protect. The tandem warhead detonated, breaching the entrance with a jet of plasma and exploding its secondary fragmentation warhead. The detonation wiped out half the guards and threw the rest away like ragdolls. A moment after they landed in broken clumps, the unlucky bastards were cut down by accurate blaster fire. Nina didn't have to give any orders. A moment later, the front of the warehouse was obscured by smoke grenades. That was his cue and the commando left his hiding place, deactivated the cloak and brought up his shields. Atanan Kaur met him at the entrance, with Dev lagging behind thanks to his heavier armor and gear. Fire was still on his perch, looking for any uninvited guests. Breach and clear, Nina ordered. Fortunately the missile had blown up a large enough hole for them to squeeze through, though it also made the entrance a bit problematic. A concussion and frag grenades went in courtesy to Atanan Kaur. A moment after the dual detonations, the pair squeezed through the breach and opened fire at whoever or whatever was still alive. Requiem for Mandalore. =RK=, Part 7. Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. Obi-Wan stood at parade rest in the small room where he was supposed to get married, with only a trio of banners for company. It's been almost 10 minutes since he arrived and there was no trace of Satine. The usually stoic Jedi was getting more and more nervous by the minute. First, he had never imagined that he could be in this position, awaiting his bride-to-be to arrive. The way he had been raised, the code that was supposed to guide his actions, they all screamed to him that he was about to do a mistake. Kenobi knew that those feelings should be troubling him, very much at that. Yet, they barely registered. Instead, all he could think about right then and there was Satine and the fact that she wasn't here, next to him. Obi-Wan was becoming rather concerned, even afraid, that the woman he loved had reconsidered. That his kriff up in the morning had made her reconsider marrying him. The Jedi in him was all right with that. That part of him was almost relieved that he was being stood up. Yet, Obi-Wan Kenobi the man, he was terrified that probably the best thing that ever happened to him was about to slip out of his grasp and it was going to be his own fault. The Jedi was so deep in his thought, that he didn't sense that someone was approaching before the door opened quietly. Obi-Wan gasped in relief when he felt Satine entering the room and whirled around. The Duchess confidently strode in and smirked at Kenobi, mirroring her sister's favorite expression. Obi-Wan simply stared at her, drinking her visage. Satine was clad in azure form-fitting armor, which was mostly covered by a robe in much richer, darker blue silk. A cape of the same cloth flowed behind her like a river. Her hair flowed around her shoulders like a halo kept in place by a golden diadem. Kenobi's eyes barely registered the helmet she carried or the blaster pistol on her hip. He was too busy trying to compare this armored version of Satine with the woman he knew for the last decade to pay proper attention to her attire. The Duchess frowned. Not that I don't appreciate the reaction, but... Kenobi. Stop drooling. Satine's voice snapped like a whip. Wah. You look stunning. Obi-Wan shook his head and tried to salvage the situation. Satine glanced down at her armored figure and chuckled. If I knew that all it took was to don an armor, I would have done it years ago. Yes. Obi-Wan cringed when his brain caught up to his mouth. He shook his head again in a vain attempt to clear up his mind and concentrate. Who would have thought? The mighty famous Jedi brought low by little old me. Satine laughed in delight. True enough, Kenobi sighed. All his self-control and composure, they simply melted around Satine once he admitted to himself that he was in love with the woman. Once he stopped trying to fight his feelings. "Oh, my. Were you afraid that I won't show?" Satine asked after she studied him for a few moments. "Serves you right," she growled. "Never pull such a stunt on me, Obi-Wan," Satine added quietly, in a pained voice. Obi-Wan found his throat suddenly dry. He could feel her pain even now. When he went to apologize in the morning, Kenobi was stunned by the heartbreak and feeling of abandonment, of betrayal that was coming from Satine. Only then it dawned to him how much he criffed up. "I won't, I swear." He took a step forward and pulled Satine into a one-armed hug. She melted in his chest and sighed quietly. Obi-Wan calmed down a bit when he felt her relax and let go of her anger. "Don't do this to me again, Obi-Wan," Satine muttered in his chest. Kenobi hugged her more tightly and kissed her forehead. They stayed that way for a few minutes, content to just feel each other's presence. "Perhaps we should go on, before either Vale or your sister come to check on us," Obi-Wan whispered. Satine chuckled quietly. "That would be just like Bo. I won't put it past Vale either. I guess that they're already married and having fun, with no care for the guests." Obi-Wan froze for a moment, listening to the Force. "I think that they're behaving themselves. For now." "Jedi tricks? I'm a man of many talents," Obi-Wan boasted. "We'll put that to the test later." Satine gave him a wicked grin, holding a promise for things to come. "I see." Obi-Wan smiled, while trying to regain his self-control. It wasn't working. He was more akin to a hormonal teenager right now instead of a Jedi Master. For a moment he wondered if all the mess that came with all these feeling and a relationship was worth it. Then the woman he was embracing squirmed in his hug in quite the interesting way and all thoughts of property and Jedi stoicism went away. Obi-Wan found that he had made his decision. Even if all of this was wrong, he no longer cared. Satine squirmed out of his hug and took a hold of his free hand, locking their fingers together. "I hope you won't try to run in the last moment." The Duchess gave him a not entirely amused smile. "That never crossed my mind." Kenobi told her the truth. "We are one when together." Satine spoke in Mandalorian. "We are one when together," Obi-Wan repeated with a proud smile on his face. "We are one when parted." They spoke in unison. "And let us never be separated," Obi-Wan added in his mind. The very thought that they might be robbed from a future became unthinkable. "We share all. We raise warriors." They spoke the rest of the vow as one. A sudden urge gripped Obi-Wan. He pulled Satine to his chest and slammed his lips into hers. For a split second she was startled, but then relaxed and leaned into his needy kiss. Obi-Wan needed to hold her. To never let her go. He was too lost in the kiss, in feeling Satine's love to notice how the Force subtly shifted as some possible futures winked off and myriad others came into reach. =RK= Part 8. Royal Palace, Sundari, Mandalore. The informal reception following my wedding was much more politically charged than I would have liked, not irksome to say the least. Yet, I didn't have a reason to complain. Everything was going more or less like planned for now. "I think Satine has the right idea and dragged Kenobi to the bed." "Skipping this," Bo whispered, while smiling to our guests. "Either that, you'll need to kneecap Obi-Wan." I shot back and nodded to Horacio Maggette, who just entered the reception hall flanked by a pair of heavily armed and armored members of his clan. They were carrying a long thin container each. Their clan leader was wearing a richly decorated heavy armor and had an ornate blaster pistol on his waist. Mandalorian weddings, everyone comes to the festives armed to fight a war. I've missed this atmosphere. It's very good he came, Bo muttered as we headed to greet the newest guest. Indeed, I whispered back. Given that Mandal Motors was the biggest and most powerful corporation on the planet, the support of its CEO and clan leader was vital for our success. Jomaget and the half a dozen other clan leaders in here with us represented a big enough power block to give me more than a reasonable shot at becoming Mandalore. Horus smiled when we approached. "Congratulations. May you face worthy enemies and raise honorable warriors." "Thank you." I gave him a respectful bow. "May you clan prosper and forever be covered in glory," Bo finished. "I come bearing gifts." Yomagit waved at his companions. The one to the right stepped forward and presented the case he was wearing to his clan leader. Yomagit picked it up and opened the container with a flourish. A matching set of Beskar vibro swords for the newlywed. Horus grinned as he displayed a 1.5 meter long gleaming blade. Next to me, Bo gasped. Given the fact that most known Beskar mines were depleted and the rest had considerably lower output than in the past, this gift was worth King's ransom. This is a truly generous gift. Thank you very much. I gave the man a half bow, with Bo following suit. Clan leader Yomagit, you and your clan's crafters have my heartfelt thanks for this gift. My wife added. At that moment we heard a quiet commotion from behind and turned to see what was up. Obi-Wan and Satine were walking towards us, hand in hand. So Kenobi didn't run away from my sister, Bo sighed. A double wedding? Horus asked from my right. It was a close call, but the Duchess managed to persuade Obi-Wan that she's more important than his Jedi hang-ups. Is he the reason she's been more reasonable as of late? Yomagit asked. I glanced at Bo, who smiled. He's been good for her. Who could have imagined it? It took a Jedi of all people to make her act as proper Mandalorian. Meanwhile I looked over the crowd. Everyone invited was here. Let's give them our congratulations, then I have something special planned for everyone, I stated. Does it have something to do with that hangar you've had off limits since yesterday? Bo asked. Yep. I hope you didn't spoil the surprise. Nope. Let's go. It will be interesting to see if you know me as well as you think you do. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, wife. Bold claim, husband of mine. We reached the other couple while they were exchanging pleasantries with clan leader Maxine Orvad and her husband, Thang. Their clan had risen to prominence during the New Sith Wars and helped Mandalore recover as a powerhouse in that period. While they had lost a lot of power since then, the clan was still an influential one. The fact that Maxine was CEO to the biggest weapon manufacturing consortium in Mandalorian space after Mandal Motors was even more important. Sister, congratulations for finally bagging your Jedi. May you two raise powerful warriors. Bo beamed at Satine. And may you become a proper Mandalorian. She smirked at Kenobi, who looked uncomfortable at her words. Obi-Wan, how does it feel being a Mandalorian clan leader in your right? I needled him. Before Satine can plant her elbow in his ribs, Kenobi smiled and nodded. Actually surprisingly good. I have the nagging feeling that the Jedi Council will blame me for corrupting you. I smirked. No doubt. The Jedi Master winced at the thought. Now that all the pleasantries are out of the way, I spoke aloud, using the Force to boost my voice. I have an announcement to make. First, thank you all for being here. All but Skata and Satine's ministers were here as a sign of support for my bid to become a Mandalore. I want to bring 2 items to your attention. First, a tradition from my home world, it's customary for the groom to present his bride a gift on their wedding day. For that and the second item, I would like you to follow us to one of the palace's hangars. Second, I made certain promises to the clan leaders present and it's time to deliver. This better be good. Bo smiled mischievously. You'll love it. == Private Hangar. Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. We were all assembled in the dark hangar bay, when I used the Force to switch on the lights. I grinned when I felt Bo freeze in surprise. She did nothing to try and conceal her shock and stunned disbelief at the sight gracing us. 2 3-meter-tall war machines were resting in the center of the hangar. One was painted black and had my sigil on its chest. However, my wife's attention was on the other, its twin, which bore her clan's emblem and colors. The machines resembled a mechanical hybrid between Zalorian Rocklion and Karen Beetle. The 6-limbed war droids rested on front pals, complete with razor-sharp metal claws. The rear half of the machines had a distinct insectoid shape, 4 rear legs and carapace-like armor. On the back, where the customary control saddle used to be, we could see open armored shells of cockpits. Needless to say, the Basilisk were bristling with weapons, laser cannons, missile pods, point defense clusters, the improved shockwave generator rods that formed their faces, and a pair of modified pulse cannons. Mine? Bo eventually asked. Through the Force she felt like a little girl who was told that Christmas came early this year. Yours. Go ahead. I smiled. Bo's first step was wary, then she shook herself up and walked nonchalantly to her droid. Pilot? the machine inquired. Bo glanced my way and I nodded. Yes. She spoke aloud. Scanning. A sensor pod lit up, illuminating my wife with a beam of blue light. Scan complete. Pilot biometrics locket. Please enter the cockpit for DNA scan and imprint. At this, Bo hastily scrambled up the Basilisk and got into the command module, which sealed behind her. Two brand new Basilisk droids. I think they're an ample demonstration that I know what I'm talking about. These particular designs were upgraded with modern weapons and electronics, new shields too. As you can see, they have a cockpit for additional protection of the user, though it's not at weapon-proof once the shield is down. I pointed at the transport in the back of the hangar. There are 2 sample Basilisk for Mandal Motors and 1 for the consortium. I nodded at Yomaget and Orvad. There are also sample of personal shields, as well as the new armors and small arms issued to the GAR along with some capital ships schematics. That's more than enough, Horus muttered after a few moments of stunned silence. Unless I got my modern history horribly wrong, the last time a Basilisk had walked on Mandalore had been shortly after the Great War I took part in thousands of years ago. As if reading my thoughts, Bo's war droid let out a mechanical roar and took a step forward. A moment later, her delighted laughter could be heard over its loudspeakers. I grinned as I felt my wife's delight and happiness through the Force. I let her play with her new pet and turned my attention to Scarter, who had a thoughtful expression on his face. Then my comm started beeping an alarm and I growled. Of course something had to just go wrong tonight. I raised my arm and switched the unit on. General Vale. My answer wasn't a grow. I think. Vale. I need help. Cole Ordo's pain groan came from the other side.